Hello, this is Mike with Wellforged Miniature Painting. Welcome to the first of many tutorials over the entire Critical Role miniature set by Steamforged Games. I'll be starting this off with Caleb from the Mighty Nine. First, I'll start off with removing the mold lines from the miniature. There is a big line running perpendicular to his hair, and two running down each arm. These are the tools that I use, and I have links for each one down below. Normally an X-Acto knife can take care of most of them, but with these being in hard to reach areas, I'll swap between the sanding sticks and diamond files. Next, we'll look at gap filling and sculpting. There is a considerable gap on FRUMPKIN. I'm also wanting to change the hair a little bit to make it more realistic. These are the gap filling and sculpting tools that I have. I'll be using the plastic putty and green stuff putty for Caleb. Links for both are down below. On a playing card, I'll mix plastic putty and water to make a thick, smooth paste. I'll then apply it to FRUMPKIN's chest. Next, I'll take a small amount of the green stuff and mix the two parts together until it turns green. I'll then let it set aside for 30 minutes to firm up. I'll then take a small bit of the putty and spread it onto Caleb's hair, especially the mold line to blend it in. I also added a small curl in the front. This step is optional and you can skip it if you want to.
Two hours later.
Here I have some cheap aquarium rocks that I picked up from the dollar store. I'll use some of these on the base using a method I call the rule of odds. The rule of odds is something I learned from my grandmother, who was a cake decorator. When she would pipe roses onto a cake, she would pipe an odd number of them, as it looked more blazing to the eye than an even number of roses. I think the same idea can apply to miniature painting. I'll add 3 rocks to the base and glue them down with some super glue. Once that's dry, I'll add some P3 mixing medium, a link to that is down below, to the base and spread it out. Once it's spread out, I'll dunk it into some Army Painter Battlefield Snow to get a nice dirt texture on the base. Just don't be an idiot like me and grab the sculpted part of the mid. If that happens, don't worry. Green stuff is fairly forgiving, just remake your sculpt. And here's how Caleb looked before priming. I'm using a roughly 2:1:1 mixture of primer, flow improver, and thinner. I like my primer slightly on the thicker side. If the primer is too thin, it can pool in areas where you don't want it to. A lot of people say that your airbrushing paint should have the consistency of skim milk. I don't drink that stuff, so I can't really gauge it based off that. All airbrushes are a little bit different, so just experiment until you find something that works. 99% of the time, I just kind of eyeball it and it works. Here I'm spraying the primer from about 6 inches away, making sure to get a nice even coating. After drying, Caleb should look something like this. I won't show my wet palette for every step, but my paint looks something like this before I apply it. I want the paint thick enough to have good coverage, but not too thick where it might cover up minute detail. See how the paint retracts a little bit? I'll start base coating by applying a thin layer of Mournfang Brown to Caleb's coat. I think of base coating like mowing a lawn. You don't want to go over the same area you just cut. Overlapping a little bit is fine, but you just want a nice, even single layer. Once this layer dries, you'll see that there's a ton of primer showing underneath. That is what you're looking for. You want to build thin, transparent layers. If you paint over an area that's not quite dry, you risk pulling up the layers of paint underneath, causing unwanted texture that'll show up later. It took me about 3 layers of brown to get this look. Using a blow dryer in between layers speeds up this process considerably. Next, I'll add some texture to the coat. This process is commonly used for leather, but I think it'll look good here. Using some leftover foam, I'll dab a little bit of lighter brown, in this case XV88, all over the coat. This process is subtle, but multiple layers will give you a nice leathery look. I'll also use a small brush to add highlights and little scratches. I will also dab some Abaddon Black onto the coat as well, focusing on the recessed areas. Using Zandri Dust, I'll emphasize the highlights on the coat that are already present in the sculpt. Using Agrax Earthshade, I'll apply a thin layer of it all over the coat, letting it pull into the recesses. This also blends the colors together a little. I ended up wanting the coat to be a little bit darker, so I mixed both Agrax Earthshade and Nuln Oil together and applied it to the whole coat after letting the first shade dry. Using Zandri Dust again, I'll reinforce the highlights that were lost when I shaded the coat. Using Menoth white highlight, I'll paint the inner part of the coat. It was at this point I decided to immediately paint the pants, gloves, boots, and belt. Don't be afraid to call an audible when you're painting. Sometimes painting another part of the mini will help frame what you've already painted and give you a better understanding of what the mini will look like when it's finished. Using P3 Sanguine Base and Mournfang Brown at a 1:1 ratio, I'll base coat Caleb's shirt. I'll shade it with some Agrax, Earthshade, and Carroburg Crimson. The crimson is optional, but it will push the shirt towards the red side. My goal is to have a good range of colors, as we're using a mostly warm brown palette. Adding some Menoth white highlight to the shirt mixture, I'll add some highlights. At this point, I decided to finish up the belt, boots, and pants. I'll highlight by using Menoth white highlight in the pants' mixture of Abaddon Black and Incubi Darkness. For the belt buckles, I'll use Stormvermin Fur, Administratum Grey, and Menoth White Highlight for a non-metallic metal effect. If you have them, metallic paints work just fine. Next, I'll paint Caleb's scarf. In the official artwork by Ari, the scarf is a muted purple. I'll do my best to exaggerate the color a little bit, so it's easier to see when holding the mini at arm's length. Adding our trusty Menoth White Highlight to the scarf mixture, I'll add some edge highlights. I'll shade the scarf with Drakenhof Nightshade, but I think this pushed it too far on the blue side for my tastes. Next comes arguably the most important part of mini painting, painting the face. For the skin, I used Bugman's Glow and Keslev Flesh to use as a base. When looking at a mini, most people tend to look at the face first, then any weapons, and then the rest of the mini. Again, several thin layers are key. I ended up working on the face off camera since trying to paint this while looking at a viewfinder didn't do it justice. With a mix of Bugman's Glow and Abaddon Black, about a 1:3 ratio, I painted in the eye sockets. Eyes can be the hardest thing to master in mini painting. If you're having issues with painting eyes, just take it slow, take deep breaths, and apply your brush strokes when you exhale. Having a magnifying headset helps dramatically, and I've put an Amazon link to the one I use in the description down below. This is where the fundamental theorem of mini painting comes in. You'll get one eye right, but you'll screw up the other one, always. I forgot to film it, but I used Calidor Sky for the iris color. Next, I'll base coat his hair and beard using Mournfang Brown and Fire Dragon Bright. I also mixed up some Kislev flesh and Mara white and added it to where the light would catch his face, cheeks, tip of the nose, and the front of the forehead. I did this in preparation for the next step, adding the facial color zones. Every face, whether it be masculine or feminine, generally utilizes the three primary colors, blue, red, and yellow. Adding these colors to the respective zone, even a tiny bit, helps make a face look more lively and human. Once that's dry, I'll tie the face together with some Reichland Flesh Shade. I'll then shade the hair with Agrax Earthshade and add highlights with Zandri Dust and Mournfang Brown. I ended up not liking the beard at this point and repainted it later. For all intents and purposes, Caleb is done. Mixing together Mournfang Brown and Jokero Orange, I'll base coat Frumpkin. I ended up putting 2 coats on him. I'll add a little bit of Zandri Dust to the mixture and paint his chest and the lower part of his head. With some Abaddon Black, I'll add some stripes and dots. Now it's time to finish the base. With Steel Legion Drab and Administratum Grey, I'll paint the rocks in the dirt. I like my paint mixture to be a little bit looser than my base coats to help speed up the process, as most of it's going to be covered up anyway. Once that's dry, I'll mix some Agrax Earthshade and a little bit of Colia Green Shade and add it to the base. Once the shade is dry, I'll apply a light dry brushing of Steel Legion Drab to highlight the dirt. Now it's time to add some grass and tufts. You can use pretty much whatever you have on hand. This is what I have. Using some P3 medium as my glue, I'll add some steppe grass to most of the base. I added some flowers and a tuft of grass near the rocks. I'm utilizing the same rule of odds as I mentioned earlier. Finally, I'll paint the rim using Abaddon Black. Look out for stray bits of grass and remove them before you paint over them. Now that Caleb is almost done, I'll add some finishing touches. I didn't like the scarf or the beard, so I decided to redo both. To seal it up, I applied some Vallejo matte sealer using my airbrush. And with that, Caleb is done. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like it, please like and subscribe for more. I'll be adding the next Critical Role miniature tutorial soon. If you painted Caleb, I'd like to see it. Tag me on Twitter or Instagram, or post a picture on my Discord listed below. A huge thank you goes out to my patrons, Lenore, Andy, Samantha, and Hugh, for making this video possible. Your support is what keeps me going. Take care and happy painting.